Something that I've seen other model builders do is add armor plate details to the hulls of their models. On newer kits there is less of a need for this because they come with molded details, but on older kits like this one with low detail on the hull, I think it could be a nice addition. The most common technique appears to be using thick masking tape, the type that goes around corners, to create edges and then using surfacer to build up a panel. This technique enables the modeler to create raised panel details, but I'm not convinced by this method. I think it is too easy for it to become messy. Instead, I'm going to try and create the panels by scribing. This model is ideally suited for this technique. There are almost no details on a very smooth hull. This is going to make scribing a lot easier. To scribe a straight line over the hull, scribing tape will be required. This is a thick, transparent tape that can hold a straight edge and support the scribing tool. The first line that I'm going to scribe is at the waterline. I'm starting here because it is in the middle of the hull and because the different colored plastics clearly indicate where the line should go. Getting this line in the correct position is going to be critical. This is the reference line from which all other horizontal lines will be scribed. Once the tape is correctly positioned, the line is scribed using a 0.5mm scribing tool. When scribing, it is best to make multiple light passes to slowly dig into the plastic. If you are pushing hard and you go off track, the deeper groove will be more difficult to correct. If you do go off track and end up with a deep scratch, it can be removed by filling it with plastic putty. After you've made a mistake, the most tricky part is then getting the scribing tool to follow the correct path and not repeatedly go down the detour. Since the scribing tape is quite stiff, so you can get a straight line, it's not good at getting around tight curves on the bow and stern. To guide the scribing tool around these corners, I'm using standard masking tape for masking curves. This is not specialized scribing tape. While this tape is thick enough to catch the scribing tool, it is not stiff and can be deformed with the tool. This is not much of an issue, I just need to press lightly and build up the groove over multiple passes. I expect scribing on the lower stern to be the most complex, just because this is the curviest part of the hull, so this is where I'm going to start. For the hull below the waterline, I don't have reference images, so I'm going to make something up that I think is reasonable. I start by scribing some lines around the skegs, and then I move on to scribing the underside of the hull. For the most part, I'm not going to scribe the underside of the hull. It will not be visible. However, in this location, because of how it slants upwards, it will be visible. That is why I'm scribing this section in particular. With the tip of the stern and the line between the skegs forming the boundary of the area to be scribed, I use a map divider to find the center line of the hull and place scribing tape. Once the midline is scribed, I have a reference line that I can work outwards from. To keep the scribing simple, I'm using a panel width of 5mm, that is the width of the scribing tape. That means that all I need to do is place the side of the tape on the midline and then use the other side to scribe the next line. This process is repeated until all the lines parallel to the midline are scribed. After scribing all the parallel lines, the panels look a bit too long to me, so I'm going to break them up with 2 perpendicular lines. Now for the freeboard. This area of the ship is well documented. The USS Alabama Memorial Park fully encircled the battleship with a path, and then a Google agent walked around the full perimeter of the ship to capture it on Street View. This gives a very nice view of the panel detailing on the ship. The first thing to note is that the panels are not very prominent. That being said, the horizontal joins appear more prominent with the vertical joins appearing riveted. At least that is the case for the majority of the hull, with there being a more prominent patchwork on the bow and to a much lesser extent also on the stern. Before I start scribing, I want to draw the panel pattern onto the hull to get a better understanding of how the panels will be positioned and fit together. To get the correct number of panels onto the hull below the step, I need a panel width of 4mm. Since I have 5mm scribing tape, I will place 1mm tape below the waterline and then position the 5mm tape on the edge of the 1mm tape. That gives me the 4mm from the waterline up. Once the scribing tape is applied in the correct position, the second line is scribed into the hull. This scribing tape is somewhat reusable, and in this case that was particularly useful because when I removed the scribing tape, the 1mm masking tape came with it. This means that for the next 4mm panel, I just need to line the edge of the 1mm tape viewed through the clear scribing tape with the newly scribed line. For the vertical panels on the bow and stern, a similar process is followed. However, in this case, I want a 6mm panel width. I start by scribing the first vertical line, then place 1mm tape next to it, followed by the 5mm scribing tape. The next line is then scribed. The process repeats until all vertical lines are scribed. At the very tip of the bow, the panels transition back to a horizontal type with a slightly different width, in this case 5mm. On the upper section of the hull, where there is more of a curve, flexible masking tape is used. To complete the panel details on the tip of the bow, horizontal segments are scribed between the vertical lines, creating an offset panel look. During a lapse in concentration, I scribed a line in the wrong position. That line is filled with putty and removed. Moving aft, but still near the bow, there are a few more lines to be scribed. For these lines, there is a bit more flexibility with their position and the shape of the panels. Even with the pictures of USS Alabama's hull, it is difficult to map the panels out accurately, so I'm going to do something that is representative and aesthetically pleasing. There aren't many more lines that need to be added to the midship. Here there are only a few very short lines that need to be scribed from the upper line to the step in the hull. To keep the spacing equal, I marked the positions with a map divider. Near the stern of the ship there is a curve that makes scribing a bit more complicated. As the hull transitions to a tighter curve, I switch from scribing tape to masking tape and repeat the same process as before. Without reference images for the lower hull, I get to make up my own pattern. I think simpler is better, so I'm just going to go for straight 5mm panels bow to stern. As before, these lines are scribed in the same way as all the others. When scribing, the plastic is pushed out of the way of the tool, which creates small ridges on either side of the groove. These need to be removed. A quick pass with a 400 grit sanding sponge sorts them out. While sanding out the ridges, I also removed the excess putty that I had applied to correct the mistakes that I had made with the scribing tool. Although all the vertical armor details in the form of scribed lines have been applied, there are still some missing details. Rivets. I'm going to place the rivets uniformly along the full length of the hull, once again roughly guided by the images of USS Alabama. As before, I don't know what's happening below the water, so I'll just do a continuation of what is happening above the water. After evenly marking out spaced lines of rivets, I apply them to the hull using a dual 0.6mm riveting tool. As with scribing, I place scribing tape to help guide the riveting tool in a straight line. After applying many lines of rivets, the armor details on the starboard side of the ship are complete. Everything now needs to be repeated on the port side. Since I want the pattern to be symmetrical, I need to copy the positions and lengths of the lines from the starboard side and transfer them to the port side. This is most easily done using a map divider. I'm not going to talk you through the whole process again for this side of the ship. Suffice it to say, there was a lot of marking, taping and scribing, followed by a little sanding, and then a lot of marking, taping and riveting. Now that the hull is fully scribed and riveted, I want to check for defects and give it a nice finish for painting. That means it's time for surfacer. This is Mr. Surfacer 500. Unfortunately, I didn't get the mixture of the surfacer quite right, and after well over a decade of abuse, this airbrush is also not spraying very well. The result is a slightly rough surface that is not good for painting. Fortunately, the rough surface is easily correctable with a 1000 grit sanding sponge, leaving a nice surface ready for paint. In the next video, I'll paint the hull in measure 12 camouflage. I'm still not sure how I'm going to do that, but I have a few ideas. If you don't want to wait for the scheduled release of videos and want to watch them when they are uploaded, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. If you would like to support the channel, like and subscribe, and as always, questions are welcome in the comments. Thank you for watching. Cheers.